Hey, everybody, thanks for joining us tonight. This is the Aspen City Council.
Where's the,
Edit.
Okay, all
thank
good.
you.
This is the Aspen City Council work session for June 20th, 2022. Tonight on our work session agenda, we have two items, childcare capacity and the goal update, as well as our asset department work plan. And we might have some other discussion at the end for some other items. Let's get into our agenda. So first item is childcare. We have Shirley here, probably going to introduce this to us.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and council members. I'm Shirley Ritter, Director of Kids First, and I'm going to go across the table and ask people to introduce themselves and their role and why they're at the table. Go this way.
Hi, my name is Megan Monahan, and I am the Senior Quality Improvement Site Coach for Kids First, and I've been at Kids First for 7 years. Yeah, that's it for me.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Nancy Nichols, and I am office staff, and I've been at Kids First for 20 years.
Jen.
Thanks.
Hi, my name's Jen Phelan. I'm the Development Manager for the Capital Asset Department, and I'm here supporting Kids First with just the design and entitlement process for the Burlingame Childcare project.
I'm Mimi Howenstein, and I am on the advisory board of Kids First as of like last month or two, couple months.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think we might have a couple other members join us on Zoom, and we have the consultant that we've been working with, Kate Kelstein, is on Zoom and knows to raise her hand when she wants to add to the meeting. So thank you. So this slide is really just a bit of background for you all. This is the wording from the ordinance that has to do with the critical goal for increasing childcare capacity. And it included the way that we are going to do that. So the three main points were the physical space, the qualified workforce, and then, of course, generating funds to accomplish that. We are continuing to show evidence of strong needs. The phone calls continue, hearing from parents, providers and wait lists, and certainly births have remained fairly consistent. They go up or down by a couple numbers, but they are still considerably higher than we have licensed childcare spaces to accommodate. So within that critical goal, there were these 5 work plan areas. So the planning and design goes primarily to the Burlingame design as a first step in that long-term process. Recruitment and retention of early childhood workforce is ongoing. It's short-term, it's long-term, it's the necessity. And then the funding to meet the community need for early childhood, policy development at the regional, state, and even national level, and then long-range planning, all part of the activities for this goal. We talked at the last work session update about some of the background, some of the births, the wait lists, the number of children in each room, all of those kinds of things to give you some context for that conversation. The long-term planning and design we'll get into a little bit more later on, but it certainly includes the building. It also includes childcare workforce housing. We know that has to be an element. And then policy and operational and other planning, even for a facility that is 2 years or more out. This is the time to really be planning for that. And then in the short term is really the early childhood workforce, because we know what dire straits those folks are in right now. And we'll talk about some of the things that we are doing currently to support them. So as we progress tonight, these are the 2 questions. And I know that these might not have definitive answers, but I wanted to sort of plant them so that we can talk about these a little bit later in the work session. And we'll see this again. So when we talk about physical space, there are a number of things going on. Balls in the air is what it feels like sometimes. But when we think about the long-term and the short-term, we are in a discussion with a qualified bidder to operate the 4 rooms that will be available, 3 now and 1 in September, in the yellow brick building. We are in the process of checking documents and making sure that everything is in place and refining some of what she submitted to us. This is a local person, and she plans to serve infants, toddlers, preschool, and pre-K ages in those 4 rooms. She would like to begin in August at a smaller capacity and build up then both enrollment and staffing. And she's got some good plans and some thoughts about what that staffing would look like from people that she's talked with already. She's aiming for late October, possibly November, certainly before the ski season then, to be fully up and running and be able to be staffed and take enrollment in those rooms. We, at Kids First, we are supporting this program with some startup materials, startup grant funding, some startup funding to help support. One of the things with childcare is it takes a little while to work through licensing and get the state to approve your license. And it has to be done by the person operating the program. We can't do that. So this director needs a month or 2 of paid time to be able to do that, to work with licensing, pull together all the policies and all the documents that she needs. And so we are supporting her with funding to help pay for that too, before she ever has any children that walk in the door that pay tuition. So that's an important piece for somebody starting out. We're also providing technical assistance, coaching, and as we do with all of the programs that offer infant and toddler care, we will offer infant and toddler funding subsidies for that first year of operation. And then along with coaching and assessment, she will be able to go through the Colorado Shines rating system. And if within that first year, she applies for a level 3, 4, or 5, then we would continue to offer that infant and toddler subsidy. So the Kids First Advisory Board soon will approve that agreement and the lease for this space. And then the same thing is really happening with the CMC infant space. The renovations are very nearly done. We've had some supply issues. Oddly enough, sinks and a playground shade structure are kind of the holdups. You just never really know, I guess, what those are going to be. And then we have also are in conversations with a couple of people that are interested and are one has made a proposal and one is in the process of getting us a proposal to operate that space. So that's exciting because it seems like we've been talking about CMC for a long time. It's been interesting because after the RFP closed on June 9th, I also got a phone call that I can just share with you. A former director and owner of a program in the Valley left the area and emailed me and said, hey, I know it's after the deadline, but do you have anything else coming up? Is there any other opportunity? We'd like to move back to the Valley and run childcare again. So I will stay in touch with them and know that there's always something else sort of coming down the road. And then, then it's the larger Burlingame planning and design. And I know you probably have questions. We can either stop at that point and then talk about Burlingame, or I can let Jen fill you in a little bit more on the progress that we've made there. And then see if you have questions about this particular part of the goal. Do you want to hear from Jen? Do you want to?
Questions on the first 2 items, yellow brick or CMC?
I kind of rather hear the whole thing, but.
Okay.
Okay,
Want me to talk about where we're at?
go ahead.
Okay. So with the Burlingame parcel, or property. It's, we came to you in March with a contract with a design team based out of Carbondale. And since contracting with the firm, we've been working with a steering committee and having a number of kickoff meetings just to get the project started. We've worked with the design team to develop an ideal program for the childcare center. We've done outreach with Burlingame. We're also planning another outreach with them in July with the residents in the subdivision as we progress the design forward. Right now, we're doing some very high-level digital modeling to see how the program, massing-wise, size-wise, can fit on the site. And we are also planning on contracting out with a firm to do some high-level cost estimating so we can have some ideas of where big cost drivers might be for the project. We have a number of concepts we're working with. We'll skinny it down to one, keep moving it forward, and we're planning to have that completed with schematic design end of August, beginning of September, when we would be bringing it back to the council to review. So that's that on housing right now, where we're at.
I have a question
Or,
about,
excuse me, I said housing.
Jeanette,
Game does it to people.
yeah, a question about the BG site. That's not at the BG3 site. Where exactly is that?
So when you drive in on Harmony Road, where Burlingame 3 is being constructed right now, you'll take a left into what will be Pepke Road. And so right on that corner of Harmony and Pepke Road is what's called Parcel C, which is approved to have day childcare at it, at that site as a use. It needs to get approved, the final plan, by council. And then we've also been looking at 2 single-family lots that abut that parcel to look at it maybe as an entire package of adding additional square footage and adding a housing component to that project, which is something we want to talk to you about this afternoon.
And was this parcel purchased by 150 funds, so the Kids First, or it has to be purchased back from the city?
I don't know, sorry, this is Diane Foster, and I don't know, and I'm looking at Pete to see if he has a guess.
I don't have a guess. I'd have to go research that to tell you the answer to that question. I know that the uses for the space have always been planned for daycare.
Right.
Scott might have more.
Okay, thanks, Amy.
I'll take a stab at it. The land was purchased by the 150 fund. That particular parcel had as an alternate, so I think it was the PD language that allowed as an alternate childcare.
And it was originally, basically it said park parcel. So right now it's been planned with some retainage on it, some stormwater, and a trail through it that would need to get relocated.
So the PD language allowed some flexibility on that site.
So we're within our legal authority to use 150 funds to purchase land and construct childcare on it?
Well, I think the land was purchased, and I think Scott's right. The PD did allow the use of it. So I do not think it would mandate returning the money to the 150 fund, because I think it's all consistent. But you have the option of doing that, certainly.
You know, I'm just trying to think back to the 1990s when Burlingame was purchased, and I really am not sure. But I'm not sure that we kept the housing daycare fund and the child care funds as uniquely separate. I'm not sure that some of the 0.45 cent housing daycare tax wasn't used as well to purchase the property, which would have, allowed that.
my memory doesn't go back quite that far either.
Yeah, but I don't know, that could be checked into, but if it was housing daycare tax as well as the Wheeler Rett monies, it would have, just been one big pile of money going in at one time,
Right.
so.
Isn't that a pretty that's a leading question, I'm sorry. When we look at schematic drawings for the lumberyard, we're looking at months and years, and we're looking at a couple of months here for the childcare. It just seems really short tractor, and I'm not objecting, seems like an awfully fast track to get it through.
Well, I think it goes both ways. It has felt to me sometimes like we've been talking about this for 10 years. And at other times, once we got the design team under contract, they moved much more quickly in terms of being able to see, that the visual, the programming. And that was a new part for me, because it really wasn't looking at the architectural elements. It was just how the building was going to work for people coming in to use childcare. What things joined each other, and whether it was ground level access or something different. So that part's been really interesting. But yes, there have been a lot of meetings lately.
Yeah. It would strike me that childcare is a little more straightforward than a 390-unit housing project, which we went back and forth on above ground and below ground parking and, things like this, community outreach. We're not seeing the same issues about childcare. You need a child placement. You want a great top-class 5-star facility, but it's not about whether it should be all studios or one bedrooms.
It just struck me as being so accelerated after how long we've been working on the lumberyard to be able to get 100% structure or schematic in that period of time. Is this an appropriate time to have further to go to talk about childcare housing?
Well, it's one of those times. We are going to talk about that a little bit more when we talk about workforce. So whenever you want to talk about it.
Well, let's let you do your presentation,
Okay.
and if I'm left with questions, you'll know it.
Okay. So one of the next major parts of increasing capacity had to do, and still has to do, with the early childhood workforce. This is not a situation that has gotten better in the past few months or the past year. But we have done a number of things to help support all of the child care programs, whether they're new or whether they've been in existence for a long time. So one of our current programs, and I give a lot of credit to Nancy right now, because we tried this out as a pilot program, and we got about 50 applications. She has gone through all those applications, along with all the supporting documents, because they had to upload their state credential, they had to upload professional development, training certificates, and figure out really what worked and what didn't. So far, as of today, we have 27 complete applications, and those folks have qualified for $25,200 to be awarded to them. So almost $1,000 each. And then this will be repeated in 6 months. So double that for the year, potentially more, because one of our goals too is once they understand how they can earn points to get a higher award, they can do more coaching, they can take more classes, more professional development. So that's part of, we've learned a lot, I think, already along the way, of things that we will do a little bit differently when we put it out again, but I think we will continue to learn what works. And we'll come back to you too with a little bit more data around what we learned down the road when we have more complete applications. Who applied, who didn't, how did that work out, why do we think that was? So those get paid directly to the staff. So I think that's going to be a big boost. It's not the same as just making more money or working less or having housing paid for, but it's a start. And then our other success, and this is something that Megan had a big hand in, and that was our intern program. If you all remember, we actually tried to start this, I don't know, probably mid-COVID, and then we got delayed a little bit because of that pandemic. So we had our first early childhood teacher intern, I believe hired last fall. November. And she completed her classes. She worked as a substitute in the programs. And just last week was her last day because she completed everything she needed to do for our internship. She's been hired by a local childcare program as full-time staff for them. So that's exactly what we intended. I know. I told her she was a great model for the first time around. So we are now advertising again for that intern position. It's a termed position, and we hope to repeat that success and keep doing it. So we've also funded professional development funding through our quality improvement grants. So any of the programs, any of the staff that work for them, they can access funding through Kids First. We pay for the tuition, the books, all of that for them to take college-level classes. We also offer some classes, trainings in-house that count as classes. It gives them more points on their credential, more points for the incentive. And there's also funding available through the state. The state is offering Early Childhood Education 101 and 103 for no cost. They're using stimulus funds to do that because that's where everybody needs to start. If you're newly hired, those are the classes you've got to get into. That and it's called EQ, but the ECE 111 that Megan and others teach. So we've had good luck with those classes. It's stressful right now for teachers. One of the other things that we worked with CMC to do is to offer those during the workday. Because one thing we found out was, particularly if people live very far down Valley, they're working long days, they're driving home, they're giving up family time or, I don't know, maybe sleep in order to take a 3-hour early childhood class once a week for at least, 12 or 13 weeks. And those, they were hugely popular, and one of them, in fact, was a dual language, English and Spanish, and that had the highest enrollment of any of those classes. So we're hoping to repeat that in the fall and get more people into those classes. And then we're also working with the school district. They are contracting with a group of local early literacy specialists to work in the childcare programs, and we're helping support that work to really work on having the teachers trained to understand what that early literacy looks like, even for 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, because there are a lot of things that can be done, and some teachers actually are already doing them. They just maybe don't see them in the context of early literacy. And of course, the school district is interested in those 3rd grade test scores for literacy. But they're willing to support the early childhood development in a way that makes sense. So that is something that has been in the works for a little while, and it will come into practice in the fall when school starts again. We've also supported for a long time Raising a Reader, and they have a new director and some new community events. So hopefully we'll be seeing more involvement. And one of the things, I know that some of you might actually be wondering why professional development funding is even on this slide about workforce retention. What a lot of research does show is that folks who, especially if you're fairly new into certainly early childhood, I suspect a lot of other fields, if you don't have a lot of educational background, you're not probably going to last a long time because it's a hard job and you can't just be guessing at what you're trying to be doing for 8, 9, 10 hours a day with, little ones. The more professional development that people get, especially the sooner they get it, the more likely they are to be successful and to be retained in their job because they have made an investment. So that's the short answer to why you see professional development funding up there.
I have a question about that or an opinion.
Okay?
I support, funding grants for professional development. But I'd like to condition that if there's any way that we can make sure that the grants that we're giving wind up supporting people that are working to provide childcare for people that work in Aspen, whether it be actually a childcare in Aspen proper, at the Airport Business Center, wherever. But I hate giving grant money to somebody that's going to provide childcare for somebody that doesn't work in Aspen.
And I will tell you, I do hear that. It is very much a mixed bag, because most of the people, and we haven't done this for, I would say, since before COVID, but we surveyed the directors in all of Pitkin County. So that did include Growing Years in Basalt, because they're in Pitkin County, but everybody else was Woody Creek, Snowmass Village, in Aspen. And we asked them where the family lived and where the parents worked. And out of hundreds, over 400, maybe close to 500 answers, there were a handful of people who used childcare up here who neither lived nor worked in Aspen. Because, too, if you think about it, it's a special kind of madness to drive up and down 82 if you don't work up here. So it was, the majority of people lived and worked, and I was surprised by that. But I think it goes to the increase in affordable housing. That was the largest group of people. The second largest lived somewhere further down Valley but worked in the urban growth boundary or in Aspen. So I hear you, and I just know that most of those early childhood classrooms have a version of who lives and who works in Aspen.
And this is something that I've asked previously, but I want a confirmation on this, is that when you query people, would you rather have your child care close to your home or close to work? What's the answer?
That is split a little bit too. In general terms, people who have younger children, infants and toddlers, want them closer to where they work. They are more likely to want to go pick them up quickly if they're ill. They might want to go nurse. Maybe they even are able to do a shorter day and spend more time with the child. And some people still prefer that when they get into the preschool age. What we see a little bit more of at the preschool age is that they want them a little closer to where they live, so that they're in the neighborhood with their peers getting ready to go to kindergarten. It's not black and white, and I think a lot of that also has to do with, gosh, if I have a space up here and I'm going to continue to have a space as that child ages, I'm going to stay. I like the program. I'm going to keep that consistency, and I'm going to stay with that program. So families make choices for a lot of different reasons. And we see that trend, but I would take it as a trend.
I don't mean to monopolize the time here, but for me, childcare is as much to support the economic sustainability of our town. So the workforce is really important to me, that we can provide childcare and housing for our workforce. And I think that, I don't know what the statistics are, but we all know 47% of the statistics are made up on the spot. But you could be right, John. But it's
I made that up.
on the spot.
You read all of the state and national reports about the people who haven't gone back to work post-COVID. I guess we can say post-COVID. But the largest percentage are moms and moms of young children. They're finding it the hardest, and the child care availability has a lot to do with that. So, yeah, it goes directly to the economic recovery. for sure. The only other thing I wanted to mention on this slide is that local programs were also able to get the stabilization funding from the state, and that was really meant to support workforce and families and give them a little bit of a break. And there might have been one or two programs that didn't apply for that, but it was a super simple, tell us your license number, how many kids you care for, and the state paid out the money. So I think that helped a lot of programs too. But there's more work to be done, and we know that.
Is that the end, or you?
Okay. And the next categories that are activities under that critical goal, I put together on this one slide because these are something that we work on, the policy, the planning. The next slide in here, I just have a recap of the policy at the state level because it was a pretty good year legislation-wise for young children and for education. And that is something you never want to take for granted. So that's a good thing. We're also working with a consultant to do planning, regional planning, as well as, we started by talking about Burlingame, but it really grew to be a little bit bigger project because it needed to involve the whole community, the childcare community, the voters, everybody in the community. So at this point, I don't know, because I can't see. I think that our consultant, Kate, is on, and I think she was going to raise her hand and just give a really brief update to you all about where she is on very near that final report and a final meeting in August.
Hi, Shirley. Can everyone hear me okay? This is Kate Kalstein.
Yes,
We
thank
can.
you.
Great. Well, it's wonderful to join you remotely, and thank you, COVID, for pushing us all to be a little more innovative and flexible in how we work. Yes, I am delighted to share that the report is in its final draft form. I will be working with Shirley to review that this week and next, and making sure that before I release it to the childcare planning stakeholders that have been engaged in conversation for the last few months, that we have all the details right and that it provides the information to meet the goals that were set for the project. The report will walk through not only an examination of this childcare planning stakeholder group that has been engaged with Kids First since well before COVID, examining the childcare capacity need in the community, but also, as Shirley highlighted and previewed, I have found that there are some parts of the conversation where we could pay a little more time that might be able to provide great benefits and dividends to the community as you continue this conversation. One of them speaks directly to the question that the Councilman raised around care close to work or care close to home, and also goes into a little more context around the various types of childcare settings and the preferences that community members are demonstrating. Those preferences can be seen in terms of offerings of your current providers and where families take advantage of part-time schedules, evening offerings, and other schedule opportunities, as well as the number of community members that we know choose private nannies and in-home based care versus those that prefer center-based care. So the report spends some time setting that stage, as well as talking about the realities of the early childhood professional workforce. I have been engaged and supported projects on this at a statewide level, as well as in some other specific communities like Larimer County, and will say that the issues are not unique to the city of Aspen, to Pitkin County, or the Roaring Fork Valley, but I do definitely see that you have some additional barriers and challenges specifically related to housing, cost of living, transportation realities, that we have some opportunities to think about a little differently and continue to explore innovation in part because of the COVID crisis. Within childcare in Colorado, we do have the benefit and the opportunity of a number of innovative pathways to continue exploring as well, where individuals who 3 or 4 years ago may not have had a pathway to become credentialed and qualified to be high quality early childhood care providers now have some opportunities that they didn't have then. So in addition to having the conversation and understanding, really what those child care planning stakeholders envision for the center at Burlingame Ranch, we also wanted to make sure to give that full spectrum of information around child care settings and choices for families, early childhood workforce, and then how this truly can be a sustainable and viable center to operate within the current reality. Where are those funding streams and opportunities? What are the real expenses? How could Kids First in the city of Aspen support a provider to make sure to minimize expenses to the largest degree possible and increase through capital stack some of the innovative grant opportunities that are available and some dedicated funds that are available as well. So the report really will give this full and rich context of information to serve to support Kids First and the child care planning stakeholder group as you continue to explore. It does contain a fund development plan, some information on sources of funding right now, and the step-by-step for actually completing that fund development effort, information on community messages, some of the messages that we've heard through conversations. So I'll pause there and then finish with my update on this larger planning opportunity that I have identified in the Valley. So any questions about the specific Burlingame Ranch conversations and the information that the report will provide?
Thanks, Kate.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, hearing none. In terms of this larger planning conversation, we have a number of different plates at movement currently within early childhood in Colorado. The new State Department of Early Childhood becomes live on July 1st. So we have all of those transitions taking place in programming and supports at the state level. Continued stimulus-funded related programs to be support and relief in response to the COVID pandemic, and the passage of House Bill 22-1295, creating universal preschool, 10 hours per week for every child in the state of Colorado the year before kindergarten. So with all of these policy and advocacy shifts, the rollout of universal preschool will be supported by local coordinating organizations across the state. Those applications are due this week for each community, and it will be determined within the coming weeks who, in fact, your local coordinating organization will be. I know that Rocky Mountain Early Childhood Council, Stacey Petty's organization, has applied to serve as a local coordinating organization. Those LCOs will initially focus on universal preschool rollout, but will ultimately be responsible for community plans and supporting both family resource and referral, as well as the early childhood ecosystem in their entire area. For you, your area is likely to include all of the 4 counties that are part of the Rocky Mountain Early Childhood Council: Pitkin, Garfield, Lake, and Eagle. And so with the shift taking place with all of these structural elements, it really is a great opportunity, and I believe a number of the issues that Shirley has already spoken to and the issues that are highlighted in the Burlingame Child Care Center Planning Report reinforce the need for greater alignment and interconnectedness of these efforts valley-wide. You have a greater degree of mobility for residents and workers crossing large distances, impacting the choices that families make. You have a diversity in your community That is also another factor in those that choose particular settings or types of programs for their early care. You have that workforce element, struggling to make sure that childcare providers can keep affordability for the families that need care while paying appropriate wages and having the income that the childcare business needs to operate in the safest, high-quality way, leaving that gap in between where Kids First and other supplemental income opportunities can help to maintain affordability and professional wages while supporting strong and stable childcare businesses, just like any other business in the community. So I have spoken with Shirley as well as a number of other partners, including Rocky Mountain Early Childhood Council, Pitkin County partners focused on early childhood. I spoke to someone with Roaring Fork School District today. I've spoken with Early Learning Network, Aspen Community Foundation, and a number of other nonprofit partners. And I really do believe there's an opportunity for a valley-wide integrated conversation so that everyone can have very clear understanding of their specific mission and priorities. You can have shared understanding across the valley. You can have alignment for some of these issues like managing the supply around childcare across the entire spectrum, including those informal caregiving settings that aren't currently being captured in the licensed data. We can increase the accuracy and make sure that we have data to tell the story for families, for providers, for the community in a more integrated way from Aspen all the way through Parachute, recognizing the interconnectedness and the mobility of those communities, and ultimately be able to address space issues, workforce, family choice, availability, and greater understanding through aligned strategies. There are a number of coalitions, existing conversations around early childhood. Your Kids First Advisory Board, the SALT has an early childhood coalition. Manaus is coordinating a more advocacy-focused conversation down Valley, as well as some specific conversations with early childhood strategy based out of Glenwood. And I believe there's a great opportunity to make sure that all of these issues are examined so that those priorities that the city of Aspen has put forward are able to be interconnected to these other efforts to make sure that someone else isn't raising wages $1 an hour and your entire workforce shifts mid-valley, or that the space availability, new programs are not opening simultaneously without coordinated knowledge, so that families really do have an opportunity to share their peer preferences that may help to inform the planning for the programmatic offerings across the valley. And for those families, we know in most families, informal home-based care continues to be a priority and a choice for a significant part of the community in many communities across Colorado. And so recognizing that those informal caregivers will continue to be an important part of the continuum, how can we make sure that those are high quality opportunities for children? Children are supported for their development, that screening and referral and resources are available in those contexts, and those caregivers are having the same learning opportunities to support community well-being as others. So that's a bit of a preview of the conversation that I hope we'll be able to start in the fall and ultimately continue to strengthen and align your efforts so that they can be non-duplicative, efficient, and impactful for ultimate community well-being, both for young children and the workforce.
Thanks, Kate.
Absolutely.
Questions, comments, suggestions?
I wasn't sure if what that was just being discussed towards the tail end was that we need to form a special district valley-wide, or is just coordination and outreach and for regionalism?
Well, so we have been part of the group that was called Rocky Mountain Preschool Coalition, and now they've changed their name, but they're working on a district for taxing that would go from Aspen to Parachute. I think what Kate is talking about is really more collaboration and having those conversations so that we're not, because what happens, we had the ability to collect more data and different types of it up here than Garfield County or even Western Eagle County. And so to work together and to figure out how we can collect the same data and make sense of it and what we need to collect, what do we need to know in that whole district. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kate, but I think that's the direction we're going to. It's partly about data collection and it's partly about partnerships.
Okay. No, I was just wondering from looking at the slide.
I will say, yeah, one other brief point, to be really candid, Shirley and the others that have had the benefit of working with me, and I'll share with you guys that this is, I've been a part of about a dozen projects in your valley over the last 10 years. I am candid perhaps to a fault. I believe that a number of these conversations are giving themselves credit for being clearer in the way they are communicating out to the community than they might deserve, and that partners sometimes have a perception that they are more connected than they are. I believe that whether it's myself or someone else, the Valley-wide community deserves a conversation supported by someone external to the work, to be able to ask some questions and encourage folks to see things as accurately as possible, and to take off their internal bias to some of this and to step back and say, if I were a community member and didn't know the lingo within early childhood, if I wasn't a parent, is this information being presented in the most accessible way? I often find it important to boil things down to a language that my fourth grader can understand and explain back to me without any additional support or context. And I think in some of this early childhood alignment and collaboration, partners need to be forced to speak in simpler sentences with smaller words to make sure that the clarity that they think they have is actual for the community as a whole.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Kate, while you were talking, I went ahead and advanced to the slide that I got from the folks at EPIC, which is executives partnering to invest in children, because they had a big hand in advocacy work this year around the policy. But this is just a really high-level look at some of that funding and policy that is coming from the state. And there are several things that could or should benefit us a little bit, from providers, families, even community folks. So
Let me ask, in between APSHA, the county, Kids First, the city, capital asset, who or how are we applying for any of these great grant opportunities for co-locating housing and childcare? And who's in charge of making sure we at least have our foot in the door on these?
that's a good question.
There's not right now. I talked with APSHA today about the grants person they're supposed to be hiring, and they are really struggling. They got no responses to the RFP. They've advertised it and had no responses. And Matthew's going to be connecting with some folks around the state who also are in this space to see if they can find someone to help.
Okay, I'm hopeful we can get the deadlines and the application information and at least have the opportunity to try to assign it and pursue.
I agree. You probably know, I applied on behalf of Kids First in the city for the employer-sponsored grant last fall, the first round. They've done a second round, but their time frame was too short. They needed an open center by this year, early next year, and we just couldn't meet that. Right. So we were not funded. But I do think that Kate's work and some of the other folks that she's brought into this, I think that makes a better grant proposal, number one. And I think that we then have the resources to hire a grant writer, because right now that's the part of our problem across the board, is that you know, you're looking at 3/5 of the entire Kids First staff right now.
No, I know, and I wasn't trying to put it all on Kids First as
No.
much as, you know, I'm looking at, you know, it's two of our main priorities, housing and childcare. And I want to make sure we can capture that to the extent possible.
So within the fund development report contained within the Burlingame Ranch Child Care planning document, there is information on all of these specific programs that we believe do apply in this context. I will note in terms of the EPIC policy update here that House Bill 1006, the nonprofit child care center tax exemption, may ultimately also provide an opportunity for increased funding to direct toward the project. There are additional funds contained in some of these other programs that are going to kind of refund the programs that Shirley's mentioned that folks are already able to apply to, including Senate Bill 213. Senate Bill 130 is interesting because it provides some incentive funds for municipalities to repurpose publicly owned spaces for childcare. So this may be a separate and additional conversation and exploration for community partners to have valley-wide about how there are some additional pots of money that are available when municipally owned space is identified and repurposed. So we will be working through these programs that are noted on the EPIC summary as well as others, and that is contained in the report, and there is a bit of a checklist for Kids First, but there is also a recommendation that there be a coordinator around that fund development work, whether they be staff or consultant partner, to make sure that no stone goes unturned.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many facets of this to provide retention, recruitment. So I'm in favor of everything that the city can do to backfill. I don't know what our limitations are, but the availability of housing, if that has to be 505 funds, or if we can earmark what housing is for. We have avoided doing that at APSHA, trying to categorize how important a car mechanic is versus to a child care provider versus an EMT or water plant employee, to try to avoid doing that. But what are our limitations, our abilities to provide child care housing? I know Ski Company did that. I think it provided aid at the hub down at Willits. So there's so many facets to this that can the city somehow provide backfill for pay? Is it possible that we could give a stipend, a couple of dollars an hour, a few dollars an hour, to encourage people? You know, the grants for training, CMC classes, some way to tie those grants to actually providing childcare for people that are working in Aspen. You know, the childcare space. We determined at our retreat that childcare capacity and affordability, availability is one of our top three focuses. Yeah. So we're dedicated to that, and we have to figure out how we can do it. And I think we have to funnel money as much as possible where we can. And I Pete's over here just waiting for a chance to jump in. You know, we've got, is it possible to have repurposing of some tax dollars? Do we need a new, yeah.
I was just going to say, I've been thinking a lot about the 0.45 cent affordable housing daycare tax. And I double-checked the numbers here with Pete. It's estimated this year to bring in about $3.6 million. It's currently split between housing and childcare, 45 for housing and 55 for childcare. When that tax first passed, I think Frank Peters was the one who proposed it originally. It's been renewed since. It was a full 50-50. But it is at our discretion to change that ratio. And so I'm just, again, very rough math here, 10% of 3.6 million is $360,000. If we were to change the ratio to, 60/40, that would be another $360,000 a year into childcare programs. If we were to change it to, or maybe, 65/35, something like that. I don't know what the right change will be. As we all know, that then slows down housing production or something. But, to me, when I look at these numbers, that is, maybe half a unit a year difference compared to what it would do for childcare. And I really do hesitate strongly on prioritizing job types. It's just so messy. Someone gets the job as a childcare worker and then they leave the job 2 years later. Do they lose their housing? Was it sold to them on that premise? It goes back and forth. Very challenging. And then you start saying, well, this job's more important than that job. And, I don't know where you get to in our community when you do that by ranking people's value to the community. But way back in the day, before we built the Truscott addition, and when I was mayor, I had suggested that we use Kids First funds to be the subsidy to have purchased and bought 8 units there for childcare. And that was the plan, and then I was out of the seat, and then a new council changed it so that there wasn't that use, and I'm sure that money went to other good childcare purposes. But I think we should look at the idea of using child care dedicated funds to secure child care housing without trying to go into prioritizing the housing that comes out of the Wheeler Ret or the general housing production. And I don't know what the exact numbers would be or how much we can assist at that point in time. But I think, for me, I would think we would turn it back to you and let us think about, or talking with Diane and Sarah, what could we do with an additional $200,000 a year? What could we do with a change in this ratio to help support subsidized rent to secure those workers? Or, we don't have a project right now that, fits that bill, the lumberyard will, for long-term rental housing, and to see this fund buy units at the lumberyard at some point in time would make sense to me. Or if we're using this money, if the child care design ends up having any affordable housing units associated with it, or something like that. But I do think that the ratio was changed once before because one need was outweighing the other. And we've seen the tremendous performance of the RET through the Wheeler for housing. That is not guaranteed to last at that level. We all know that as well. But I would rather change that ratio and have a chance to work with more money within this program. They've been tremendous stewards of every last penny that's ever been given to Kid First. And that's how I would approach getting more money to these issues.
Yeah, and I think that in a number of places and throughout the country that the objections about housing tied to your employment they've been addressed. The city has it with 505 housing. You leave the city employment, you have to move out. School district does it, hospital does it.
Right.
So it's been a challenge that has been answered throughout the country for a very long time.
And I agree with you, Ward, but I think it's answered when it comes from dedicated funds.
Yes.
And that is, it's totally appropriate.
Just one quick clarification. APSHA already does prioritize emergency workers, and that includes social service, mental health, and abuse counselors. And there's a list of that in the APSHA code, but they actually do have a priority, both for rentals as well as for bidding on ownership. Thank you.
Yeah. It's a limited pool, and we're, as I said, already getting requests to expand that to automobile mechanics.
And I just have one more question, then I'll
Yeah.
shut up. Evidently, yeah, probably not.
Just one more.
Just one more. I think, Shirley, in 2023, something like $20,000 per kid comes available from state funds. That's tied to the child?
The 10 free
Yeah, that was the universal preschool primarily for 4-year-olds. And it talks about 10 hours of preschool. It's actually about $4,300 per year. And they're trying to do an awful lot with that. Like Kate mentioned, make sure it's high quality, pay the teachers, and provide essentially tuition for families. So I've been involved in a lot of those calls and will continue to be, but I don't know exactly how they're going to accomplish all of that with a limited pool of dollars. But they have some high aspirations, and they've got a good start. So.
And just to clarify for everyone, that funding formula has not been finalized and released. The 4,300 is an estimate. It's the best estimate that anyone has right now. But those funding formulas will be released in the coming weeks, but we have no certain information yet.
I had a question on that one as well. So, I mean, it just struck me as interesting. We're subsidizing each child care hour at some level. And so is the state paying the full subsidized cost of that child care hour? Or are they just paying, saying, hey, it's great you subsidized the first half, we're going to chip in a little more? But I think that really needs to be established, because it's, you know, at least for the state, for its record keeping on this program. But this is already subsidized care coming from our tax dollars to begin with. And if that is it going directly to the parents? Is it going directly to the providers? How is it taken care of?
That's part of what we're watching, because the funding is meant to follow the child and the family. And the expectation is that we'll look quite a lot like the Colorado preschool program that we have now, where it's X amount of dollars, gets you this many hours per child, you choose which program you go to. It will look a little different than that, but we will have to adjust, but in a good way.
Right.
So that, and that program is on behalf of the child, but it goes to the program. And then we can adjust our financial aid to meet that, but not duplicate that.
Right.
And the same with any support that goes to the programs. I mean, that is really the beauty of the local funding, is to be able to then move it to where it does the most good, in addition to leveraging what the state does.
Yeah, and that just leads me to one last question. It was really a question for the Kids First Board as much as anything. Over the years, we've talked about whether parents with means are paying the full cost of the child care, and then subsidize down from there, so that at least some small percentage of the child care costs are really being covered by people who can afford it and aren't being subsidized by this program. And that's always been awkward to me, that we advertise the lower subsidized price kind of for everybody, and it's not means tested in that sense. It's means tested for people who get additional subsidy, but not the main cost. And if the providers were charging, you know, it's kind of like saying this bar of butter costs $2, but we're going to subsidize it down to $1.50. But you guys who are millionaires can get it for $1.50 too. And that's just not quite right. And we need to say, this is the full cost of providing this service. And we would, you know, for those who have the ability, and I think we're subsidizing up to 400% of the federal poverty level now. And there's those folks well beyond that, but we've got to get closer to telling people what the real cost of childcare is. We're hiding it. We're hiding the problems.
You're right, and that's been going, there's two things happening. So the subsidy that we do for infants and toddlers, yes, that subsidizes the program and everybody gets the benefit of that. The financial aid is based on what the parents make, and there's a sliding scale that goes along with that. So that's where it gets a little more complicated, but I don't disagree with you, because the full cost of care for infants particularly, and to some extent toddlers, would be at least twice probably what is currently charged.
Yeah, and I guess it's just awareness and transparency is helpful for the public to understand. Especially if in the future someone's going to be going for some sort of special district valley-wide, and you think you're going to talk the voters into it, and they go, well, Joe's got his Childcare, it's only $65 a day. It's like, no, the true cost is $130, but we're subsidizing it. And whether it's the professional development or any of these other bonuses that you're offering, that is subsidizing some people who don't need subsidizing.
Well, and we've worked with programs in the past, but we need to sort of up those services. That it really gets to technical assistance to help them dig into their budget so that they have a better understanding, too, of what their costs are. It's sort of looking at the budget backwards. Instead of looking at the tuition you charge and then seeing how much you can pay your teachers, if you really started with the mindset of, this is how much it costs to run this program, and this is the gap between what we charge and what we need. And that goes to a lot of that public awareness, so.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you.
And I think maybe Stefan, he just texted me, our board chair maybe raised his hand.
Oh,
Stefan Reveal.
there we go.
Steph, you there?
Maybe just wanted you to give the message.
Steph, can you unmute yourself?
There we go. Can you guys hear me?
Gotcha.
Okay. It wouldn't allow me to unmute myself. So first off, just want to thank all of you for taking the time to listen to us, and obviously, we feel like this is very important, and we appreciate your continued support in feeling like this is important. I think, some points on my side are that we are progressing forward, and I do feel like we have had some decent progress. But one thing that I feel like we need to hammer on is not only just the poignant issue of infant care spaces, but also the entire ecosystem that surrounds it. And so providing that childcare facility, but also the childcare provider, that director that can, supervise. And I don't know if you have spent much time around a director of a preschool facility. They are truly, and I mean, they should be running a Fortune 500 company, honestly, with the ability for them to multitask from, plunging a toilet to scheduling to balancing a budget. So I think, just back to what Shirley had just talked about, which is the fact that, we do have some executive directors that might need some technical support. We should be looking at that, but also looking at all aspects of this new facility that's coming in at Burlingame, and making sure that it not only provides spaces for the current, but also the future. It just points me to when the high school was built and it was already out of space for all the kids that were in it. So I think we definitely need to make sure that we plan for the future, and also make sure that we look at the entire ecosystem. And so that we take care of those teachers and those kids. And I think it is super important that we do that. And I look forward to the next few months of talking with you and to others about the fact that we do need to look at all aspects. And we will have more poignant questions towards you, but also I definitely want to hear your thoughts, and I think we're hearing them pretty loud and clear. And I think we need to look at potentially increasing the funds that we do receive, because we have been a strong fiduciary custodian of those funds, but also there is a great need. So Shirley, that's all I had. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steph.
Thanks.
Thanks for your work for the city of Aspen on this board for a number of years and your leadership. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Stefan.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate
your support.
Likewise.
So I want to go back to the conversation that was at the table regarding the current split of housing and childcare, and see if there's something that we need to do. Does this council want more information to come back to us so that we can forward this conversation?
As I was kind of saying, and I think it's following what Ward had wanted to do and find a source to get some more funds in here, is maybe have staff come back to us with a couple of options of what the changing the split more radically, 60-40 or 35-75 or 35-65, something like that, what it enables us to do for childcare.
About 55-55.
So
That's fair.
That's fair.
okay.
But I think that if we could express support from more than just myself in looking at those potential changes,
Yeah,
and I think that's it. I know
that's
we've
what I'm
talked
looking
about
at
it.
John and Ward for. I support it
I do
completely.
too.
So Diane, I'm going to put that at your feet and say, hey, we're interested in taking a look at that. It was brought to my attention when we're talking about the housing needs and the housing issues that we have. This amount of funds may not make that great of an impact in the housing arena, whereas they can make a great impact in the childcare arena. So maybe an appropriate use here. Okay, I just want to get that done as far as business goes. You have got a couple of questions that you're looking for a little bit of input on. So I want to get to those. And I don't think there's other questions outstanding on the presentation as we've seen it so far. Did you want to touch on your last point or points, or?
I think they were pretty much covered in
Yep.
the memo. I did not have any new information that wasn't in the memo about what the surrounding jurisdictions might be doing around childcare. And I think it just points to more reasons why we need to partner and work together. It all makes a difference for families and for kids, certainly. So we'll keep working on that. Basalt is moving forward. Town of Snowmass Village, I could go back to that slide, expects their report out very soon. They expected it by now, actually, so that's coming anytime. And I don't know much more than what I read in the paper about the school district's plans, but I asked the question and I was told that they did not anticipate any changes in their early childhood program in the next year.
The next year.
So-
And I think that the changes wouldn't even be in 12 months from now, because they're looking at increased capacity through actual building, physical plant
Well,
stuff.
possibly, right. And they're also looking at they were looking at least at the possibility of running year-round instead of just following the school schedule.
Okay, so that programming change is not going to happen now. So we're looking at a year
Correct.
for either one of those.
As far as I know.
Rachel?
Yeah, the one thing, it strikes me, and be the first to say it's a little bit of a stopgap plan here, but both the two seasonal housing projects, Burlingame and Merritt, will empty out at the end of music season, and then they are quickly leased up. And employers lease those for their employees in advance. And I think Kids First should think seriously about, getting its name in, leasing a couple of units for recruiting potential teachers or housing need as needed. The Burlingame seasonal may be more appropriate as more lock-off doors on
But
the individual
it would
bedroom.
still remain seasonal.
They would be seasonal,
Yeah.
but if it was someone for this winter and get a chance to get your feet in the ground, or someone who's just lost some housing and needs a new place to land, I'm just saying, a lot of other businesses line up pretty quickly to get those, and you may want to consider that as a board, being ready for
And
that.
that's managed through APSHA.
It's a good idea for the future. They actually opened up for winter 22-23 on Friday, and they were fully subscribed in an hour.
Oh.
Wow.
Wow, I've never heard of the processes acting like that, because that means it's all businesses as opposed to individuals who are already signing up for next year?
That's unlikely because there are a lot of individuals who come
There are
back
a lot of
every year.
individuals who've come back. Okay, I had no idea that they could sign up that quickly. For both seasonal projects?
That's for Meralt. I don't know about Burlingame.
Why don't we check into that really quickly? Really quickly.
Good suggestion.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. And I mean, honestly, that takes us back to the questions. And I know we've talked about this. I'm glad that we've got a little bit more direction. And I think we do have some good ideas. We have some good models for what that could look like. I know the Kids First Advisory Board has talked quite a lot, too, about the housing really being the biggest way to make an impact. And so, we'll continue to look and see what other models, how we might do that sooner than later. Long-term is one thing, but to do it for this winter, yeah, you know how to get a hold of me if you've got another good idea, for sure.
Shirley, can you give us an idea how many childcare workers are there if our facilities were fully staffed?
In all of Pickens County, there are 100 and probably more when you count ski company and all of that. But what we don't know, even though we did a survey, but we didn't get definitive answers, was, how many people would take advantage of a program like that? How many really are fairly actively looking for housing? We can ask that question. We can find that out pretty quickly. Some people prefer to live down Valley. They need more space, all of that. I do know that when the ski company built the housing there in Willits and they dedicated 8 units for childcare for that Basalt 3-mile area, it filled up right out of the gate.
Yeah.
And it was rental, and it was as long as the people worked in those childcare programs. So we can certainly talk to our contacts there a little bit more and see what they learned in that process. But right now, I mean, that catch is finding, how many units do we have available? Do we have 5 or 8 or 10 that we could even consider, that we could look at? So.
The other thing, I don't know if it's circulating through the child care universe, would be to get on to the APSHA website and the Home Trek website. They have been advertising some low-income units at Truscott for months now, because it's harder to get people who are low income as
those
wages
are
have
rentals.
risen.
Yeah.
But both the Country Inn has a low income and senior priority, has had advertised units, and the Country Inn. And what we've been told at the APSHA board is generally it works unfortunately, with these lower rates, with the low-income tax rate, with a single parent with a child or things like that, and that can often be childcare workers as well. But,
Okay.
I tell everyone I work with at City Market or anywhere else to check weekly, because rentals are posted on a Friday. They will take the applications through Wednesday. The people with the longest work history in that 5-day application period will get the unit who qualify. It's not the 4 years as if for ownership.
Right.
Rentals are very different. They're posted on Friday. They are gone by Wednesday. So, as you're trying to get people into those units, I think that's something to send a group
Okay.
email every Monday or whatever.
I'll check into that and find out more about that process and which income categories we're talking about.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I
okay.
think childcare providers will qualify for low income.
That's what I was afraid of having to say out loud.
Okay. Well, so I think we've got some good direction, and we'll come back, with a little more. I think not only what I heard you say about changing the split of the sales tax, but exactly.
How could it be used?
What that money would get,
Do the best for you.
what it would do. So, okay. The second question on here is a little bit harder, and I really struggled with that because we've talked off and on about this is a regional problem. We need to be working regionally. And I understand that, and I've been involved in the Basalt Coalition, in this Rocky Mountain Preschool Coalition, but I think more specifically, I wonder about, are we talking about, does it make sense to invest some of the child care fund in a child care program further down Valley? Or are we talking about working in partnership? I guess more specifically, for our direction, what does that look like? I heard Ward say about benefiting people who live and work in Aspen. So where does this mesh? How do we move forward working regionally with childcare?
This is a faint memory, but it seemed like in the very first years of the housing daycare tax, we were funding some facilities outside of the Pickens County line, and the legal departments called us back on that.
I believe it was also probably the finance department.
Yeah.
Because I recall exactly, we funded infant programs in Glenwood.
Yeah.
And it was a great cause, and we didn't know how much money we had. We didn't know what we could and couldn't do.
So anyhow, I guess I was just getting back to the fact that I think there's limitations in terms of fiscal support at a regional level because of how the tax is structured and what it was intended to be spent on. It's just like we couldn't take that tax and build a park with it. We can't spend it out of the certain regions. I mean, we do in terms of your time and efforts.
Absolutely.
I mean, and this is just me, I can't speak for council, but I think it's good to be discussing these things and working on these things regionally, but until other communities are saying, let's put a tax on the ballot, or how do we fund it? I mean, it's a little bit like the housing discussion, and everyone says, well, let's have a regional housing program, and it's like, well, what is your mitigation level for all your new growth of free market homes? If it's zero, how are we supposed to have any sort of equity in a housing program? So it has to be some concurrency there, and I guess that's at least a little bit of what I see. I'd love to see us working more regionally, but I think that it's been one of those things that we may have tried in the past to work around the legals a little, that, yes, the center's outside of Pickens County, but the child's parents work in Aspen. It's a little confusing.
It certainly comes up, and I guess I would even turn that around and think about, if this group does do a taxing district from Aspen to Parachute, then I would ask you to think about what would be your expectation for what and how that money comes back into the community?
Yeah, well, they haven't even talked to any of us at all, so I really wouldn't know.
I would say by the fall, they're getting ready to. They have quite a long timeline to work through, because they have to. They have to get support from all of the municipalities, the counties, everybody involved. So that's where I'm sort of thinking ahead of that game a little bit, so that you all can think about, well, what does that equity look like if it's a regional tax and a regional benefit?
Yeah, I think I agree with what Kate was saying, valley-wide community on a collaborative basis, but for funding, as long as all the money's coming from a local tax, I want it to benefit the people that are
Community that's
Paying that tax.
Yeah. It really strikes me a little bit like the whole RAFTA formation into a regional transportation authority, and that was really step by step by step. It used to be just a city-only tax to support a city bus system. Then they had a repeal and replace question that was countywide, that would repeal the city tax and replace it with the countywide one. It became the county bus system. And then eventually we grew it in. At first, we were providing free service to Glenwood Springs to show them the benefits of it. And eventually it became a regional transportation authority. But there was 2 different real startups on that. And one effort went for 2 years and kind of collapsed on its own weight.
Okay.
The formulas were awkward. It should be based on sales tax, should be based on population, should it be based on property tax? You know, everybody wanted these different formulas that benefited one municipality more or less than a county, you know, so on and so forth. The second effort, and literally hundreds of thousands of dollars were spent with facilitators and planners and people doing this economic analysis to say what would be a fair formula before it was put on the ballot for a vote in the year 2000. I think it was the fall of 99 or 2000, something like that.
Okay.
But I still see it kind of needing to grow that way and have those advocacy groups within the communities themselves who cared enough and said something would happen. But you're right, the other issue about governance was one of the reasons it took so long. Not just the equity on the taxes. It was like, you know, you had Aspen, Snowmass, and Pitkin, and at the beginning, really, we're putting in more of a lion's share, and it became, well, what happens if we're outvoted and all the money is spent somewhere else all the time?
Right.
That hasn't happened. It's worked to be a very collaborative effort. There's been different issues at different times, but those governance issues would be of concern about where the monies are spent. And, you know, it's happened now in that the RAFTA tax does now include a property tax, but from the very beginning, the Valley effort was like, well, hey, if we could just get a property tax up there in Pitkin County, it can pay for the whole thing, and we won't have to do much of anything, you know? And so there, you have to watch out for that kind of attitude.
Right.
Thank you.
Other comment?
My comments would be, looks like things are progressing rather nicely, quicker than I thought they would in some areas. It seems pretty obvious to me that we do need housing as part of the Burlingame Childcare facility, and I look forward to seeing the next steps.
Thanks, John.
Thanks.
Jen?
Can I ask a couple questions with regard to Burlingame housing? That's one of the things I wanted to bring up. So as part of the Burlingame childcare development, we're looking at co-locating housing as part of the project. We've discussed that. And as I mentioned, we're basically looking at 3 lots for this project. The parcel C, Park Parcel C, which is the largest parcel, which we looked at allowing for the childcare, and then 2 single-family lots that are adjacent to it.
Right.
Right now, you know, we have that initial program for the childcare, but we are looking at the design direction on the inclusion of housing. And essentially, there's 2 paths. Right now, we have 2 single-family lots. They allow a single-family residence for each one, so you're talking about by right 2 units. And that's a pretty easy pathway forward as far as, you know, part of the site design and entitlement potentially. Might not be the best site design depending on what we need for the building and location, but it would be an easy path forward. We're also looking at adding density, so more affordable housing units to that site. And most likely, it would be in the form of multifamily housing. And basically, when you add more density above those 2 units, you're going to be adding more complexity to the entitlement process. There's a cap on density in Burlingame, but you might have better site utilization with more density on that entire 3-parcel project area. So one of the things that we were hoping to get a little direction tonight is, are you thinking multifamily is the way to go and more than 2 units?
Let me ask you, can you go a little more into the detail on the entitlement? Does it take a vote of all the residents of existing Burlingame? Is that the issue, or?
It may take approval of the HOA.
Okay.
It will take, you know, we'll have to probably look at the density cap and amend that. And so it's just going to be more complex And, you know, I think I know what the design answer is, but I want to make sure that you're aware of some of the complexity of it.
Jen, you said the HOA, there's a BG1 HOA, BG2, is there a master HOA? Because there is no HOA for 3 yet.
Yeah, we're going to go through the agreements and we can come back and be very clear on it, but
I
there's,
support more density.
I support more density too. I think the added complexity is definitely worth it.
Yeah. I would agree with that,
Okay.
with density.
all right. That's what I was looking for tonight.
Well, and start outlining that path forward on for us, you know.
Is that about
Can I ask
everything?
one other question? Is the park parcel currently used much as a park?
No, and it's for Burlingame 3, it's going to be, again, I think the key, I've already talked to Parks about this, the key issues they feel are any trails. So there's the trail along Harmony Road, they're very concerned, they're concerned about making sure that that is not impacted
Okay,
more than it needs to be, because that's a basically
Major.
pedestrian
Yeah.
bicycle thoroughfare in and out of that
Yeah.
community. And there's also another trail that's being proposed. It's a connector to that trail I was just talking about, and so they'll be looking at that too. They're also, for Burlingame 3, there's going to be drainage that's going to be
over there.
installed and retainage. So,
Okay, I just wanted to make sure it hadn't become a
no,
favorite
there's a lot
picnic ground or
lot of
something.
topography
Okay,
there.
thank you.
Let's see. I just want to share a couple of thoughts. I, like John, have a lot of hope for the direction that we're going, a lot of good news that I've heard over the last week or two. My concerns are still the same. We obviously are having staff issues. Housing is at the crux of those, I believe. So I'm glad to hear that we are looking at ways to solve that and come up with solutions. But that does impact how I view Burlingame. And so I am in the same boat about increasing density if that's the path that we need to go. Because I can see that housing is going to be a difficult fill. So if we're going to be building a new facility at Burlingame, we're going to need the ability to get staff in there. And I just don't see this situation getting better unless we do something about it. In your memo, you said something about outreach, and it may have been outreach to Burlingame residents or what have you. An initial meet and greet was undertaken at Burlingame and a survey completed through Aspen Community Voice to identify community concerns and preferences related to the center. Have we seen those survey results, or could we get some of those concerns and that input?
Yeah, we can get that to you.
I would love to see that. My concerns on the lighter side of that are about the access. That Harmony Road that leads in there is a 2-lane road, a slow 2-lane road that goes up into there. So I've always really thought that the location at the lumberyard or the ABC was probably an easier drop-off and pickup point for people, but that's on the smaller side of my concerns. Mostly it's just about staffing and the housing that it's going to take to really get that done. And then I just wanted to say that I want to share my appreciation for everybody at Kids First. And that's board members as well as the staff. Shirley, of course, you as well. It's been a rough 6 months, if you will. We've had some changes that we're looking at increasing capacity, and some of those choices have been questioned by different people throughout the community. I will say that I've really avoided engaging directly too much through the newspapers or through other avenues where oftentimes communication can get misconstrued. I don't think a lot of people have all the facts behind how this has been going, and I just want to not only assure the public, but also just share my appreciation. I think Kids First, the board and our staff over there have done an amazing job. And I know that you've taken it on the chin a little bit from different members of our community, and I don't think it's been justified. So I just want you to know that there are a lot of people that stand behind you, that support you, and feel like you're doing a great job for our community. This is tough. This is going to be tough. Even if everything works out perfectly for us right now, this is not going away with just this solution. That leads me to my last comments. Your last question was about the regional participation of the city. The number one thing is coordination. As you said, even in your presentation and on some of your slides, there are a lot of different entities that are looking at increasing capacity, both public and private. And so as long as we are coordinating and making sure that everybody is abreast of what everybody else is doing, that is step one. Communication is necessary in this whole thing. And from there, I think together we can really attack this as a regional problem, which it is. And the solutions are only going to work if they're regionally based as well. I just want to say thank you to all of you guys, because I know it's been a rough year for you. I've heard some of it myself, of course. And I support all of you, and I thank you for the work that you're doing.
Well, we appreciate that support. So thank you. It takes a whole team. And we have a great team, but that extends all the way up to the council table. We couldn't do any of this without that support, truly. So, and I would also say the Kids First Advisory Board, they were certainly right in the middle of that as well.
Yeah.
And stepped up. So, yeah. Thanks, right back at you.
Thank you, Shirley.
Shirley, you made some kind of announcement recently, didn't you?
Yeah, my announcement that it's almost time. I have a little bit of time left, but to sort of be figuring out what the next chapter looks like for me and where that takes me. And it's exciting to think about, but it was interesting. As I did talk to the folks at the paper about, gosh, what was different 25 years ago? Well, oh my gosh, everything pretty much. There was no resource and referral for childcare. It was so different. We were a baby program. When I came on, there were 2 of us, and we each worked half-time, and we pedaled as fast as we could. But it makes a big difference. And to have that ability to address community issues with local funding is an absolute gift, because we can leverage that. We can work around what the state or anybody else is doing, and it's been noticed. It's been noticed across the country, and certainly now with all the attention that gets paid to early childhood, I feel like oftentimes we sit back and go, oh, that's a great idea, and we could figure out how to do that here, and then the other parts of the times we sit back and go, we've been doing that. We already do that. So it's a great feeling, and some very committed folks all the way around to be working with. So.
Well, for me personally, and I think the community, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I think Mimi and I knew you the day you moved into town.
We were back alley neighbors, so yeah, I think that was probably the case.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Ward.
Thanks.
And we'll see you again before that ride off to the sunset.
Well, I've got some things to finish up and some ways to support current staff and support a new director, and I'm excited for that too,
Yeah.
So
So we'll see.
it's all good.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks, Shirley.
Okay.
Thanks.
Surely there must be something you can do.
I knew you couldn't resist, Ward.
I did too.
We will just take a moment while we switch over for our presentations. For our second part of our agenda, we will be getting to our asset planning.
Thank you all. This is Kate, and I'm going to sign off. It was great to be with you.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Kate.
John, tomorrow's the 21st.
Yeah, it is.
someone manages that. I don't know who it is. Oh, the agenda order for tonight. That's all. Nope, they asked him.
I chose 1:30.
Oh, you know what? Actually, I messed up. Oh, wait. I can meet from 1:30. Wait, no, I forgot that I promised, I told Sarah and I are meeting tomorrow. We usually meet from 1 to 2 on Tuesdays.
Okay.
But we canceled all of them except for tomorrow. So I'm
That seems
sorry.
more important.
That's bad, and I do need to update her. I can meet after, from 2 on. I'm free.
At 2 o'clock?
At 2.
Sure,
Great.
that works for me.
And when are you guys heading out?
I think shortly after that.
Cool. 30 minutes or an hour? Or 45? Or,
Whatever you'd like. The more time.
well, how
the
much have you got?
better. I don't have that much.
Okay.
I'm easy.
Okay, let's do 30 minutes.
Okay,
I have I'm going on vacation next week, so I'm,
awesome.
John Doyle, I will send you an invite.
Where are you going?
Clayton Gorge.
Neat.
Yeah, we've got 2 sets of 9 groups of friends coming. One all adults, one families with kids, and 2 different time periods. So
Interesting.
yeah, it's fun.
I was just reading about, I was unaware of this, that Flaming Gorge, the water that comes out is warm, and so it creates this perfect habitat for certain types of fly fishing, which is a huge part of the economy in that part of Utah. And
It is a world-class fly fishing destination. People
Right.
fly in for it.
yeah, and that they're super concerned, all the stakeholders in that fly fishing industry, because they're going to release water to boost Lake Powell.
And it's actually a little bit, it's only a slight difference, because I think it's super interesting. The water is actually cooler because it comes out of the bottom of the reservoir.
Right, because that was part of the story. There was somebody in the Utah legislature that was an avid fly fisherman, and so this one person came up with this idea of putting in a penstock that went to the cooler waters.
Right.
So that would.
Yeah, and
that would-
it's amazing. My husband will float it probably almost every day
Cool.
while we're there.
Right
So,
on. That's a gorgeous sound too.
yeah, it's beautiful.
I also read that they're doing a study, when they do the release, they're gonna time it to see exactly how long it takes and how much rock through that place.
Oh, interesting, a evapotranspiration study.
Yeah.
It's good word out.
Sounds complex.
2 packs, huh, Ward?
Yeah,
It's actually,
I'm trying to open
Kinda
one
nice
now
there.
so I don't disrupt the meeting.
All right, we are still on air and still broadcast, so we'll get right back into business here. Our next item up is the Asset Department Work Plan Review, and we've got Robert here to introduce the item. Good evening.
Thank you for having me. Rob Schober, Asset Director. Try to be pretty short and to the point this evening. I'll present kind of real high level what our department does, current staffing levels, and then we'll talk about project priorities moving forward in 2022, kind of early 2023, and have some discussion around that. The Asset Department kind of has what I consider a split mission. The first is maintenance of city-owned assets. We take care of the building here, the Armory building. We assist a lot of other facilities around the city, like the Wheeler Opera House, the Rec Center. We have our fingers in some of the things they do as well. But that's one of the big things that we do that's probably less recognized. It's not, it's not in the paper or anything. But, specifically taking care of these facilities is a lot of work. There's a lot of planning that goes into it. I didn't put on here that the city-owned housing stock is another, taking care of that and making sure that everything's in good working order. It's a tall order. So we do spend a lot of time on that. And then secondly, some of the things more notable are big projects, developing new assets. I did put on here, obviously, the new City Hall. We're right in the middle of Burlingame 3. Those are 2 of the larger projects, but We do have a lot of smaller projects, less glamorous, replacing boilers and housing units, roofs, taking care of sewer lines, lining sewer lines that are leaking. There's a lot of small projects, planned and unplanned, that the asset department ends up taking care of and executing. So some of the additional services provided outside of, that you might not think that our department takes care of. We already touched base a little bit on capital project execution, but we do help other departments with their capital projects. One example would be the parking department. We're helping them replace the elevator or refurb the elevator out here in the parking garage and replace all their fire sprinkler systems. So, we'll take those projects. A department head might come to me with a need and say, hey, look, we need to do this. We'll help them scope that project, get them pricing, produce any documents that we need, and take care of that for multiple other departments. There's no real rule of thumb as to when we get engaged. I mean, generally speaking, the more complex projects is what they come to us with. But, oftentimes as we're planning the next year's capital budget, I am in discussions with other department heads, and we do take care of other departments' capital projects. One of the more difficult things that we do, kind of back of house, is long-range capital planning and estimating and budgeting. So we put together the LRP. Pete takes that and models that and tells us what we can and can't do money-wise. It is difficult. We do spend a significant amount of time looking at not only the AMP fund, but other funds across the city, and doing our best to plan ahead. Scoping of projects, like I just said, taking care of other departments' projects or other projects across the city, helping someone define what, they come with an idea. They really don't know exactly how they're going to get it done, so helping to scope that project, clearly define the scope, pull together whatever documentation, background we need in order to execute that project. And then facilities operation. So it's not, it's not like we just call a contractor and say, hey, come out here and fix this. There's a lot of background work that goes into these projects and taking care of these facilities that our department heads up. There's a lot more front end and planning work that you normally don't see or hear about that takes up a lot of time. It's not always glamorous, but it's part of the job. Current staffing levels for our department, we are, as fully staffed, we'd be 10 full-time staff. The director and myself, we have 4 project managers. We have 3 full-time maintenance staff, and then we have 1 administrative assistant, and we currently have an open vacancy for another project manager. So if you know anybody looking for a good gig, send them my way, please. It's going to move into, more, we're going to have some discussion this evening is work plan highlights. I just threw some pictures out here. These are some of the bigger projects we're working on. They do take up quite a bit of time, and I have staff assigned to each one. But, Jen's back here with we just discussed childhood center planning and design. We're moving to schematic design with the lumberyard housing. And then Burlingame Ranch Phase 3, Perry, one of my project managers, was out there punching one of the first buildings today. So we're coming along pretty well with that. And we're still looking to deliver some of those units this fall for sale. And on to work plan priorities for this year and next. And this is where I'm looking for your feedback, and I'll ask some specific questions from you, and then we can have a conversation around all of this. The first is the RFP for the Rio Grande building restaurant space. What I would like to do and ask you guys is we'd like to craft an RFP for an operator, a restaurant operator for this space. There's been a lot of discussion about what the building needs in order for this to become a restaurant. I can give you some real broad guidelines. The building as it sits, more or less, we cleaned it up, the hood. Some of the restaurant equipment is in there, some of it the Tasters people took with them. And it needs bathrooms. When we reconfigured that to add offices up top, there was an elevator that was decommissioned. So the restrooms on the top level were serving that restaurant. So in order to put a restaurant space in there, we have to address the restrooms.
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
Because what I've wondered is, what about the parking garage restrooms that are around the corner? Because if I go and eat at Tiki Mania, I have to get a key to go downstairs into Clark's Market to use a restroom. It's nowhere, it's not in the same building, it's not in the same restaurant.
Correct, yes.
Thank you.
So there is a public so there's two pieces of that. One, there's the parking garage restrooms. So we also have that budgeted to redo those restrooms.
Good.
Make those ADA compliant and spruce those up. So that's going to be happening. You'll see that here in the near future. And we also do have public restrooms, obviously, right across the park there.
Right.
That's something we'll have to work with ComDev on. You know, that is part of the code for the the usage of the space dictates that portion of the
Restrooms
code,
inside it.
restrooms of the code. Whether or not we have to put in two restrooms, male and female restrooms, if we might be able to get away with one small unisex ADA restroom, TBD. It's a space, small space. There is a potential of moving the restrooms outside of the existing space and tagging onto the building envelope. But that being said, I guess in terms of crafting SRP, I don't want to guess at what a restaurant operator is looking for in their space. Lease terms, length of the lease, their business model is all going to dictate what that space ends up looking like. And I don't think that us as city staff should take a guess at, say, hey, we're going to set this up for a restaurant.
Right.
Without knowing what.
No, I agree with that. I just was wondering about the requirement that
Sure.
there be a restroom inside the restaurant when there's other
As of now,
facilities that don't
my
have that.
understanding is that if that space is going to be used as a restaurant, it will require some sort of restroom.
Inside it, okay.
Correct.
Just really glad to hear this because I've been approached by several people already wondering about this space, and that's specifically what they wanted, was to have some input onto how the restaurant's set up. And so thank you for beating them to the punch.
Sure. So, again, and we'll circle back to this, but we'd like to craft an RFP for that space. We can solicit some of your input on what you'd like to see. I mean, obviously, we want to know what you'd like to see for that space, put some goalposts up and see what comes back. And like I said, I think, talking to restaurant operators and seeing lease terms, length of lease, what kind of menu, I'm not a restaurateur, not going to pretend to be, but there's a whole lot of pieces that go into it when people come back with their responses, we could sort through that and then determine what the best path forward is and, who's going to be in that space long-term.
Excellent.
And then moving along, so obviously we were here not that long ago talking about the armory renovation, potential costs with that. Funding for that is TBD. It's going to be with what we understand council has a desire to turn that space into. Funding is a challenge. So what I would like to do is, the way we originally had this plan was to roll more or less directly into the armory renovation when this building was complete. Armory would be completed. We had the powerhouse, another year out after that, and then the Main Street cabin, again, out after that. I'd like to scoot up the old powerhouse preservation project and make that a priority for the asset department. We do not have that project fully scoped. We can craft that scope as we start along. We're going to focus on two things. One is preserve and create a sustainable building over there, and second is fulfilling the needs of the facility master's plan and the final program requirements that were identified in the verified programming. We have the asset department, the IT department, special events, and transportation who are slotted to move into that space. There are some needs that we for sure need to take care of. There's some exterior repointing, the roof needs to be addressed, the mechanical systems need to be addressed. It does open up ADA, upgrading to ADA code. There is potential for some, depending on how it's programmed, there's potential for some meeting space in there, some open meeting space, and we can come back, and again, we have a blank slate. I want to say we have a blank slate to work with, but
You have an empty box.
we have an empty box, correct. So with what we have budgeted and looking at some of the wants and nice-to-haves and the needs, I think we can come up with a good solution long-term, make that building good to go for another, 40 years.
Quick question. I'm aware that ID department's in the Armory,
Correct.
and all our fiber optic cable goes to the Armory? Is that
Correct.
correct?
Currently,
So
yes.
if it's moving to the old powerhouse, does that mean we have to move our fiber optic down?
So part of, and I don't want to speak too much for the IT's long-term plan, but this facility here is designed to handle that, the IT, all the equipment over there, is going to move over here.
Great.
And that would be a part of that. Not specifically that project, but that is something that near-term needs to happen in order to,
Do the Armory.
anything to the Armory, correct.
Okay.
And then following the old powerhouse preservation would be the Main Street cabin housing and taking the cabin and IT and transportation currently live in the cabin. When they, not, excuse me, I misspoke, not IT, special events and transportation.
work.
Would come over to the old powerhouse, and then we would renovate the Main Street cabin into housing.
Makes sense.
Lines with council housing goals. And continue, like I just spoke, to continue to serve internal, external stakeholders with a high level of professionalism. We have a lot of other little projects ongoing that are, still going to keep moving along. But these are the big moving pieces that we have hanging out there for this year. So I just want to, throw that out there, ask for feedback, see if that's amenable with council. There are some, we're playing a game of musical chairs, right? So there's always someone with all these renovations that's left without a place to be.
chair.
You don't have the best answers for that right now. You can go ahead and ask the questions, and I'll do my best, but.
I was just wondering a little more about the Main Street cabin. I was under the impression it was named historic by the city,
Yes,
so it has
yeah.
historic designation. Is there a backyard to it that can have an addition or additional housing units on that site?
It's a pretty small lot, and, yeah, why don't you come up? I was just gonna say, it's good you're sitting here. Yeah.
So the Main Street cabin lot is a 3,000 square foot lot. It is designated, it's in the Main Street Historic District, but the period of significance is Aspen Modern. It's a panabode.
Right.
So kit house. It was, I want to say, when I was reading some of the history on it, it was built, I think, 65, 66, or maybe 55, 56, somewhere in there.
I know that. I've been really wondering about what's the best utilization of it overall. And so I was wondering, again, with historic considerations, is there an addition or how many housing units we get out of it? But even beyond then, if we took, okay, this is what would be reasonable and maximizing that site for housing, what is the comparison of that versus perhaps the city selling that and allowing it to be retail type of operation or something on Main Street? We've been talking about not having more residential on Main Street, having more business on Main Street, and then be able to use those dollars for housing in either in an existing complex or something we're building or something else. I mean, are we holding on to that asset because we have it, or is it the most valuable for us to have it, or is it most valuable for us to use it in a different way? And that's my question.
And I don't know the answer to that.
Right.
But the Panabo does have an addition on it, and we can look at the value of that property. But it does have an addition on it, and then when you talk about possibly converting it to housing, you're also going to be looking at parking, et cetera. So, we have to keep the Panabode as a designated property structure. The addition that was built in the mid-'80s could possibly be renovated or torn down and rebuilt. And so that's all the kind of things we'll need to be looking at.
Yeah, I guess I'm happy to proceed where we're going now. I really would just like to have that comparison and that path thought through before we commit that this is what we're going to do, rebuild it and get X many housing units out. I have no idea what it would be worth. I have no idea whether that money would be better used somewhere else to produce employee housing for the city.
Rachel, I have to mention this. In lines with what's the best use for the property, it's Aspen Modern. City Council does have the ability to delist it as Aspen Modern, which would give the city a lot more latitude and a lot more value to that property. So I know we have a number of panabodes in the Aspen Modern inventory. So I mentioned it with the property that you used to live in, to delist it after it got listed by the city as Aspen Modern. And as soon as you do that, you decrease the value and what you can do with it. So I have to put that up because that's an opportunity for us to evaluate what the highest and best use of that property.
And if I may, just from a staff perspective, when we're looking, hiring police officers is probably one of the hardest things to do. And a lot of times those folks come in with a small family, and that kind of housing is incredibly difficult to find, especially in such a prime location. So just on behalf of staff and folks who are with Alyssa and Sarah working on employee housing for city staff, it is quite a critical location. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, no, it always trade-offs and challenges.
And I mentioned that, oops, Mike. I mentioned that not because I was thinking of selling it, but because we could put more employee housing units on it.
We could negotiate with HPC about how to reconfigure what was the
If it's
addition.
delisted, HPC has less control over it.
That's right.
Well, and as Diane has pointed out a month or two ago, once we have a property that's owned by the city, we should never let that back into private hands. It's something we need to hang on to.
Yeah.
Require an election.
It's not just listed as Aspen Modern, it's in the
It's in the
historic
Main
Main
Street
Street
District.
district. So HPC would maintain
Still have control.
authority. Yeah.
Anyhow, I wasn't thinking of delisting or moving it or anything like that. I was just wondering, what is the real capacity for its housing potential in the future? And the only reason I would consider a trade is if we were able to get more value for more housing, basically. But, and I understand what you're saying too, but we've been trying to discourage residential on Main Street through the private sector. That's the other reason I bring it up.
I think it's important to know all your opportunities, and there's a couple unanswered questions. We'd like a little more information on the Main Street property.
And I liked your retail idea.
Let's go back to the top of this list. RFP for Rio Grande Building. Do you need anything from us today, or are you ready to work the RFP to be released?
I can start working the RFP to be released. Is there anything specific, that you would be looking for outside of affordable restaurant that I should know about?
I don't know how you would include the idea of its location and how it serves the teen population.
That's what I was going to think of.
It's a small space, so there's not a whole bunch of opportunity.
Not gourmet and not high-end. We could say that right off the bat.
That's true. So I guess I'm just wondering, you put the RFP out, you'll get a variety of responses, and from there, we'll be able to talk more about the path forward.
Correct. I mean,
Can you include some general criteria that you're looking for? Like you say, serve a certain population or menu price. It's pretty hard to legislate exact menu prices, but
Yeah, didn't want to do that.
but a range, and I think we get where you want to be. But anything like that you want us to put in the RFP that helps people
Family-friendly.
decide if they want to respond to the RFP.
Yeah, family-friendly, utility.
Family-friendly.
Is there a length of a
Affordable.
lease that you're envisioning?
What's typical these days? 5 with a 5 option kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, like the length of the lease term will for sure drive responses.
It will help responders decide what kind of investment they're willing to make in the building as well. If it's a 2-year lease, they're going to think
Two-year
they're not going to want to put a lot of money into it. You give them 5 plus 5, that's different.
And that was actually another question I had, and I don't know whether it goes in an RFP or if it's a consideration. And it's also because I have a lack of knowledge right now about what it takes to really reopen it as it, even if it was just what it was. Are we considering as a city potentially putting up any money to help operator get in and get opened and have that repaid over several years of the lease? I mean, I'm just wondering if to get the truly family-friendly and lower-priced and teen-oriented type of menu, and if it's going to take a really huge investment, it doesn't work out in someone's pro forma. And do we need to be a partner, basically, in getting it back? And again, potentially upfronting some funds that would be repaid through the lease. So it's just a question for you to consider. You don't necessarily have to answer now, but I just don't know what caliber or expectations, or are we asking people to put 500,000 in to get the door open, or is it 200,000? Or, I don't know the magnitude of it to know if we
I
need
think
to
that's
do
one of the questions we're going to ask in the RFP is do you need public money to make this work and pencil out? And let the responses dictate that.
I think if we can open that door, we should look at Cooper Avenue as well.
Well, I wouldn't mind us doing that, but that's a different discussion.
You mean the Cooper Street pier space?
Yeah, Cooper Street, that's on Cooper Avenue.
There you go.
But I've just had to wonder about both this one and that in the same sense. But
Yeah.
affordable dining and things that, we just read through our community survey coming back, and some of the single biggest complaints were the lack of a place to gather, to meet, to have an affordable meal, to take the kids out. And, I think we do have at least one, if not 2 potentials there.
Yeah, the community survey was a bit disappointing to me, but I realize that there's some things that we just don't have control over. There's some things we can move the needle on a little bit.
Right.
That's one of them, the taster space, and Cooper Avenue might be another one that we could do something on.
I agree.
But I think this was put last on your priority list, the Rio Grande restaurant space.
These weren't in any particular order.
Okay. Okay, so I was looking at, I was thinking you were asking some kind of priority, and in my mind I had, where's Armory fit into the restaurant versus the Main Street, old Cannibal, yeah.
So then could you maybe share with us, what is your timeline? What do you think? When do you think the RFP will go out? That will be people's first opportunity to respond with their proposals for what they would like to see or envision there. What do you think your time frame is?
I think we could pull something together in the next month and have it ironed out, ready to go.
That's great. I
I think
appreciate
that
it.
would mean bringing an RFP back here
For
with
us to look at,
specifics in
and then
it
it
for
goes
you
out.
to approve, and then we'll send it.
Yeah, but a
Yeah.
month or so. Honestly, I hate, I don't know. We have done this before. Myself, I have not, but we could pull something together and have something pretty well ironed out, I'm sure, in that period of time. Getting back on your agenda is probably more difficult than pulling it together sometimes.
That's great. Part of the reason I asked that is I think there was an article in today's newspaper that might have led some people to believe that it had already been let out and that there's already been respondents. I know that I've gotten a couple texts today myself, so I just want to be clear that the process is just starting. We are getting the RFP together. That could happen within the next month to 2 months where we'll be reviewing that.
Yeah, I'd like to, by the end of summer, have an idea of what the direction we're going to be going is.
Okay. Very good. I'm glad to hear this is on track.
The bandwidth of your staff to handle this, after the RFP has been presented and it comes to us, build out, and all of those activities that would require your attention, what is your bandwidth for that?
Yeah, so I mean, that's really going to require the level of involvement from the city standpoint on what the build out is, how much we're pitching in, how much are we letting the restaurant operator take care of. So, I mean, I have this and penciled in, and I know it's going to take resources and a significant amount of time. And that's what we're prepared to do. That's why I'm here telling you this is what we're going to prioritize. So I'll make sure this happens.
Very good.
Okay, let's, old powerhouse preservation. For me, I guess I'm kind of interested in a little bit more knowledge about where we're at. When we moved into this building, we were told that we still need about 6,000 square feet to bring all departments in-house into city-owned buildings. Does that number still stay in the ballpark for us?
That's close.
It's close. I didn't come prepared with the verified program in front of me. My apologies.
No problem.
Yeah.
Part of it is I just, I wonder about our allocation of space. I know we also have opportunity, and again, funding aside, but we have opportunity for greater development here on this campus. And I'm just wondering, I'm having trouble kind of aligning my priorities without knowing maybe all of our opportunities. The Armory has come back to us with some of our desires at about a $20 million renovation. I don't think we're even close to being able to really tackle that for some time. Unless Pete has some other news for me.
Is that on or off?
It's on.
Okay, good. I can never tell. Yes, Mr. Mayor, I think we are a little bit constrained by resources right now to be able to do an extra $20 million in a project that we didn't have penciled in. We had about $7 million in 23, 24 for the Armory development, but that was before that discussion. As that price tag moved north, plus as we've added a few extra projects and as we've seen cost escalation significantly on a lot of our projects, we are really getting constrained. As I think I spoke to you all a few weeks back about the STR process and the current revenue going into the AMP, it's only $4 million a year from property taxes. So that has to cover something at the recreation center, that has to cover our copiers here, that has to cover police vehicles, that has to cover everything else. So as kind of the fund balance has dwindled down that we've used to pay cash on things, we haven't financed a lot of projects other than the building we're sitting in here really, and the police department of late. That cash is starting to kind of be depleted over time, and as these projects are getting higher and higher in cost, we don't have those resources. So right now, the best ballpark I have for you, and we've been working on our 2023 and years out planning process over the last number of months. I've taken the Armory renovation out right now, and we have about a cushion of $6 million as our low point in the AMP in the out years. So if I have to put $20 million in, we're definitely upside down in the near future without any new revenue source coming in. So I think, what Rob's been doing here is kind of saying how can he prioritize other community spaces right now with these affordable housing restaurant spaces and other things until we can find a new solution for funding the Armory that's a long-term plan. And I guess that's kind of where we're sitting right now.
So then, Rob, at our last presentation, we talked about 4 different opportunities at the Armory. One, the base low one, I forget the dollar total on it, but it was basically new paint, if you will. cleaned up carpet and paint.
That was the 7 million.
That was 7.
That was 7 at the low end. I mean, I would kind of talk to council members and say, do we need to reassess our approach on that, on the armory? Do we want to strategize or delay for some 20 million, what is now 20 million, what could be 25 within a few years? Or do we want to take an approach where for a $7 or $8 million, we get a building that we can return to community use?
You know, Tori, the thing is, to me, and unless I was really misunderstanding it, it wouldn't be much community use. It'd still be the kind of rabbit warren of subdivided offices that is in there now. I mean, it wouldn't be any opening up spaces, and it wouldn't make it like a galleria, or it wouldn't make it like a space you really feel like you're doing anything in. It'd just be like an abandoned building that it's been painted, and now you're in. I mean, it just wouldn't feel right to me. But one more second, I mean, that's my real question, is that just that was worthless to me. But what was I just thinking? It'll come back.
Okay.
I'll let it go.
Okay, and this might jog it to come back, because what I'm wondering is, you know, and you're right, Rachel, there's definite need for removing office walls and the like, if it was really going to be utilized. So that's what I'm wondering, is if maybe we need to relook at that and say, hey, for that $8-9 million, do we make the third floor an open third floor? Do we make the second floor an open second? But you're right, we're not going to be able to move the elevators, we're not going to be able to move the stairwells and the like. But it's really just a question. I don't have a preference here.
Yeah, no, I know that.
Like,
I'm just
do
saying, yeah.
Because the county is in there till
Mid-September is what they're saying.
it's to the end of this year, and we're not close to getting either approach going. So we're looking at that Armory building, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't have any uses allocated in there after September. So literally empty.
Yeah, so.
And so I don't know if there's a different path that maybe we can do something. I don't know.
Well, you know, this is what I was just thinking about, and it may be a really, really crazy idea, but what if we talk about, is there a potential to merge this with the parks and open space ballot question and opportunities there? We're thinking of making the Armory primarily a public facility for public use. We already know we really aren't finishing this park out here the way we had wanted to, and that potentially there'd be some funding for that from the Parks and Open Space Fund. But, you know, we seem to get a sense from the community as well, well, let's do it right. If you're going to have a ribbon cutting and opening the Armory, is there a way that it could be bonded for some amount of that and be part of that issuance and the part of that question? And I don't know if they've already begun their polling, because if they have, we might have to add a few questions or chat with people about it. But I mean, it just seems like there might be an opportunity there. There might be reasons not to.
The polling has been completed, and I'm not sure it would fit under the current language of the bond,
Well,
ballot.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, and I was thinking the ARC had to be funded separately from Parks and Open Space money, or the ARC facility was funded with,
The Recreation Department, yeah, the ARC can be funded by the Parks and Open Space, but that's the way the ballot was written.
was it the ballot for the ARC, or was it for the ballot for the open space? I mean, I'm just trying to think, if we haven't written ballot language yet, there might be a chance to be able to include that, or something towards that. I mean, it seemed to be a community priority. It might be the type of thing that carries it over the finish line.
Yeah.
Nothing's written yet. You would have to approve it and coming back to you in August.
Well, it's just a thought. If we wanted to find a way to speed this up some.
Or Pete, would that?
I know the parks guys have a full plate of work they want to do with every dollar they're going to ask for too, but, you know, we're one big organization.
So when we presented to you several weeks back, we presented these concepts. We were letting the design and the end usage dictate what the costs were going to be. So if it was your wish, I could work with Pete. We could determine what the AMP could handle and then let the cost drive the design and come back with some other, here's what we can do, and be a little more succinct in what we think we can do. And we have the feedback from the community of what the uses that they'd like to see in there. But again, just to be clear, like, we were letting the designs drive those numbers.
Right.
Yeah.
And Pete did, you did ask council about possibility of including that in the STR tax.
Yeah, so I think some of the things that are,
Well, for the AMP in general, but then targeted towards it.
yes,
Yeah.
so some of the things that were included in the STR tax was the aspect of this property tax disparity. And the property tax are things that help support our infrastructure, the majority of our infrastructure in terms of roads, bridges, but also public buildings that aren't dedicated to a specific type of operation. So if we freed up those dollars a little bit through another revenue stream, that also frees up those dollars then to be used for projects like this.
Part of this, it's tied to the powerhouse, because we have ACRA in the powerhouse, and we've promised space in the armory for ACRA. So all of those moving parts and pieces have to align.
So, so part of this is scooting up the old powerhouse would be moving ACRA, most likely, I would say, to the armory, and putting it in that space as it sits now, with maybe a light touch. What that leaves in question is when we do the armory renovation, whenever that might be, where does ACRA go? But like I said, it's kind of, I look at it, it's a musical chairs game, and someone is always without a space while it's being renovated or touched up, so.
So are you suggesting a timeline that when the county leaves the armory, we would start on the light touch for even just floor one if we were going to be moving ACRA in order to get work going on the powerhouse?
Correct, yeah. So we would have to figure out what kind of space. We know roughly the space ACRA's requirements, but what we would need to do to put them over there. We'd also have to talk about timeline, a lease. There's a whole bunch of moving parts to that. ACRA's lease is up, I believe, at the powerhouse in September, I want to say.
End of September.
End of September. So they have notified us of their intent to renew that lease.
Right.
And with, other than, a heads up that we were talking about this tonight, I haven't gone any further with talking about ACRA, about that, that scenario.
Yeah.
So this would be us, looking to advance these projects in this manner.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's still some pieces that I just don't have great answers to, unfortunately, right now.
Just to help with this, I hope help with this conversation, on page 10 of your packet, which is page 1 of Rob's memo at the bottom, he lists these 4 projects that he's talking about and how much is currently budgeted for each of them. The old powerhouse, well, the armory, obviously, we're on hold. Old powerhouse has $350,000 appropriated for 2022 for design and entitlements, and a remaining $3.15 million for 24 and 25. Main Street Cabin has $315,000 in 2022 for design and entitlements, and $1.785 million for construction in 2025, just to help you understand what is actually budgeted.
So we're talking about scooting those up. As you see, 24 and 25 were the years that we had the construction, the vast majority of those dollars sitting there.
Yeah. Those numbers are part of why I was looking at Main Street Cabin thinking, wow, it's going to be about $2 million to do, and we're going to end up with 2 units, housing units out of it, or 3. That was the reason I thought, maybe defer that cost, realize the cost, the value of the property, and put it into real housing somewhere.
So question on the Main Street cabin, Panabode, those funds, can they come out of a 505 fund?
Yes, that's what we were. That is what we were anticipating. That's the employee housing fund. Yep.
Yeah, so how many units are we potentially going to get for the 2 million?
We're thinking probably two.
To $1 million a unit? You know, again, if there was value there to be sold, that's almost like buying 2 ROs out at the North 40.
That's the cost of a unit to build today, too. I mean,
Yeah.
if you look at the lumber yard, I think we're at 1.1 or 2 million per unit.
I was going to say, it's easy to do the math when it's only 2 units. When you start
It's only
looking
2
at
units.
70 units, you know, at Burlingame, what they're costing, it's
Similar.
similar, so.
Well, I'm all in for the RFP for tasters.
Mine shaft housing.
You got that.
Pretty easy to see the
why I
complexity
put
of the
that one up top.
problem.
Yeah.
All right. What other kind of constructive conversation around this can we have this evening?
Well, the money's already allocated for the old powerhouse. Do you want us to go ahead with that project? I guess that's question number 2.
Well, yeah, you got so many moving parts and pieces that if we're going to take special events from the pan abode, we have to have a place for them to go, and that's the powerhouse. So it seems like powerhouse should be first.
Yeah.
We've got to start somewhere.
And this is the preservation. Is it also the renovation and making it into city office space?
Correct.
I've always kind of not seen that building in its location as offices for the city of Aspen. So for me, this is a difficult one because it's not really a utilization of that historic asset that I really think is the best use of it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to withhold any support at this time.
You know, Tori, I understand that, but, you know, and I thought a little about that myself last night after reading the memo. I was like, man, we should just really shake things up, move everything around one more time. But really, the decision to move the new council chambers into this building instead of leaving them in the old city hall and bring the clerk's office over here to go with it, those drove other choices. And I think that this is a good meeting room, and the right decision was made. And I realize these are painful steps to get to somewhere else, but I don't see a different path forward, really. And, you know, the thing I've talked about the most, and I think staff has taken to heart, is how do we maintain the potential to use the yard of the old powerhouse as it was used in the past when people would have weddings down there or events on the yard or something like that and still be able to access the restrooms. But that's all, you know, I mean, I never used it as a public facility when it was an ACRA office for the past decade or so. You know, it really wasn't a public facility in that sense. But the yard sure was used, and I think that's the real essence of that.
So I will say, Mr. Mayor, that of the Powerhouse Preservation Project, preserving it, sustainability, mechanicals, ADA, that is the vast cost of what's going into this. The office reconfiguration, while yes, it costs money and it's expensive, is a small piece of it. So, you know, looking long-term, is it possible to maybe do something else? Sure, it's not like you sunk this huge amount of money into it.
I appreciate
and it's,
that.
you know, that ship has sailed, so.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
I support going forward with this sequencing as we're seeing it today.
Yep, you have support at the table.
With a few questions we wanted answered later.
Yep.
So,
So our next steps will be to come back with an RFP for the taster space, and then we will start bringing back more detail on the old powerhouse and the Main Street cabin.
Yeah, I was going to say, Main Street cabin, we have some homework to do before we go too far with that.
Okay.
And same with powerhouse. We'll be back to report, estimates, scope, and we'll let you know what's going on.
I had one other funny question to ask just about Pete, since he's here. And because I don't have these numbers on the top of my head. What do we have in City of Aspen unrestricted reserves? I imagine that's the general fund. What?
I don't know if I have that number for you off the top of my head.
Yeah.
We targeted 25% of use in a given year, and I know we're above that. I will say that that number does come down over time just based on how we plan. So we kind of taken a conservative approach on our revenue streams, a couple of percent a year on kind of fee-based revenues versus our expenditure side where we anticipate, 3.5% kind of growth on labor and goods and services. Actually, you're going to.
But I guess the essence of the question to really think
Yeah.
about or look at before we meet again is there any level or amount from our current reserves that we would feel comfortable throwing into the AMP plan for 2023? I mean, I know that's not a question to answer now. That's a question for you guys all to look at and think about.
A one-time infusion, essentially,
Yeah,
is what you're
obviously, it's
thinking.
one-time money.
Yeah.
And again, I just don't know, and I know we have other obligations, but I had wanted to ask that question. And it's just, sometimes you can, at this table, you can keep yourself more in a straitjacket than you need to be related to policy choices. And so I just wanted to know if we might have any other policy choices that would allow us to augment the AMP at any level.
Absolutely. And actually, one thing we are already likely to propose is slightly adjusting the percentage allocation of the general purpose property tax between the general fund and the AMP. Because right now it's 45% going to the AMP and 55% going to the general fund. We're probably going to move a little bit more towards the AMP because that's.
Another ratio change.
Yes, and it's something within the council's power. And so we figure like this is one way to help, again, support this fund that seems to be having a lot of demands against the resources.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you very much for that.
That's all I have, unless anybody else has any other questions.
No, not on this topic, I don't think.
Thank you. This is a complicated jigsaw puzzle. Appreciate your work on it.
It's like those old games where you had to put alphabetical order and you have one
You
square
slide
open.
the tiles.
Yeah,
I'm glad I don't have to think about it in my free time.
yeah,
You do.
you do.
Well, not as much as these gentlemen and ladies
They
do.
don't. You do.
So, Mr. Mayor, I had one item I was hoping to bring up this
Yep.
evening while we're in session together. And I'll admit to having fallen a little behind my own scheduling on this. At our last APSHA board meeting, we had a citizen comment at the beginning, which I think I've relayed, with a request to consider essential worker status for auto mechanics. That later in the conversation, as we went to board member comments, led to some discussion about the potential of the city prioritizing for sale units at Burlingame 3 for folks who work within the limits of the city of Aspen. And that a second round, should they not all sell, would then go to further within the urban growth boundary. I understand the county's in a difficult position, but the request to start funding housing more seriously and with more than just mitigation dollars, which I think we all know only partially cover the new employee demand, and they're only set to partially cover the new employee demand, and for both the city and the county. that it leaves us with a tremendous shortfall. It leaves us with a community and valley-wide shortfall. And at the end of the conversation, Kelly McNichols Curry, Commissioner, asked if Skippy and I would craft a letter that could come from the city or something like that to express the great need for assistance in affordable housing and how serious we're feeling the crisis is, which I think was just reaffirmed with our own community survey. And so I've been trying to put this together, and I apologize again for the timing. I know we're all heading to CML next week, and we're heading into the end of the month. But if the county were to consider any sort of funding question for this November's ballot, they need to let the county clerk have notice of a potential intent to ask a question. It does not have to be very specific, and it does not have to, it is something they could decide not to do. It's very similar to what the county has done, asking for our polling to begin to ask a potential open space tax this coming November. When we see the results of that and we talk and we look at everything else, we'll decide whether or not to go forward with that question and what that question would actually be if it goes forward. So it's kind of just asking them to give themselves another couple of months to understand and think about participating seriously with this. I've tried to list a number of different areas where certainly additional funding is needed. I don't know if you guys don't want me to read this whole thing to you, but we know that APCHA has traditionally been funded based on what the county could afford as part of the 50-50 split of APCHA. And I was on that board as well, and I know it's like, well, we can't put in more than 400,000. And so we would not fund positions that APCHA has needed, and that's part of why it has gotten so far behind. I think that when you compete for state dollars, and they look all across the state, I certainly know this from trying to pursue lottery dollars, they say, well, these dollars would buy 100 homes here, and they're only going to buy 10 homes here. So where should we spend it? And so to pull down any of those sort of grants, you have to do not just your local match, you do an overmatch. You offer more money than they normally get for their local match to try to compete. That as a county, there are pillars of health that you hold from having the Health and Human Services Department. And one of those main pillars of health is named as safe and affordable housing. That is for both seniors, and that is also dealing with the homelessness issues, in which Ward has been very vigorous about participating with the Homeless Coalition, but yet there's really no specific money that's been allocated towards that. Having the funds to begin planning for supportive housing for seniors in our community. And again, at the APCHA board, we've talked a little about right-sizing, incentives to get people to move to right-size units or different units. But we've talked about, well, why don't we design a place that people want to move to? Instead of saying, well, now there's a 3-bedroom up here or 2-bedroom here, or maybe you could get priority at this one in some older complex. We've never really thought about building supportive senior housing options, and it's a long-known community need. To begin to catch up on the dramatic shortfall, the city is short many positions, the county is as well, RAFTA is as well. I don't think there's any organization you could talk to, let alone private business, that isn't fearing for its long future. I've listed the Phillips Curve project and rebuilding. And I think that part of the strain on that has been that there's not really funds to go forward in a big way there. I was on the board of the county commissioners when we moved to buy that. So that's probably about 4.5, 5 years ago. You know, in the county, there's no real housing person, so it's part of 3 people's different jobs. They don't really have housing staff for that reason. And that's part of why that one's taking all the time. To be able to participate in land banking and future partnership opportunities, you know, whether it's participating and wanting to buy in some units at the lumberyard for county staff, or to buy in for lottery units for the general public, or to help other agencies in which they work. The county oversees the library district. The county's a partner and oversees the ambulance district. I think there's a way that the county would have far more power to help drive design and decisions by being a moneyed partner at the table. And it would give them the money to have some incentives to tackle major known policy needs, incentives for right-sizing, settling lawsuits, resolving looming HOA capital reserve and repair shortfall issues. We've been talking about how nice it would be if we could finally create a low-interest, easy-to-access affordable housing fund for owners to be able to borrow money at a reasonable interest rate to repair their own units, so when they're sold to the next person, they're in good shape. But, you know, when you're already qualifying for your house with 30% of your income, it gets pretty hard to get a second loan, and it gets very expensive to get a repair loan. And you'll be paying a much higher interest rate for your repair loan than your unit ever appreciates for. So this is, how do we get people to do it themselves? We have to create ways and tools to do that. I try to close with, simply put, the city cannot do it alone. The housing program was begun by the county. The county recognized long ago the need for affordable housing and has a legacy of great foresight, having preserved Smuggler, Aspen Village, Lazy Glen, and Woody Creek neighborhoods. But we need that full participation and focus again. And so I realize I may have been wordy in the letter, and I realize that the timing is such that I can ask you, if you would like to sign onto this as individuals, but it was not on our council agenda for this evening, so we can't pass it as a council action letter. I guess we could formalize it later, 2 weeks from now, and just send it as individuals now. But I'm taking guidance from our city attorney, if folks would like to be supportive in sending this type of effort because there is time. The time is of the essence, but there is time for them to consider having a ballot question this year. I do state in here it will be the most full and representational vote we could have in this community, because it will be the governor's race and our congressional race, and I think we can anticipate participation from people with all viewpoints, and it'd be a nice chance to get the temperature and maybe augment the work we're trying to do and the projects we know the community needs.
And to be clear, if we were asking anything of them right now, is really just to contact their clerk to say, hey, be prepared, we're gonna be having this conversation over the next 2 months, right?
Yeah.
And I would assume that would come from the
BOCC?
it'll be posed to the BOCC, and if there's a majority of BOCC to support that, then they can open the door for having those discussions with no commitment to asking a ballot question or not.
That's correct. I mean, I guess the real thing I'm trying to say is we need help. Everyone is turning to the city to say, can you prioritize our people? Can you get more together? We've just lost our neighborhood. We've just lost our friends. I see things unraveling rapidly. And as much as we try and squeeze our assets, we alone can't do this. And I think that's what this is a call for help and a plea for help.
Rachel, I just want to say thank you for putting this together and thinking about it, and I support it fully. I think the county commissioners need a little nudge.
If you don't mind, Mr. Mayor and council, I just want to emphasize a few things.
Please.
This is a work session. You can't make a decision in a work session. You can't make a decision outside of a formal meeting. What you are requesting is that at this point, they notify their clerk, as you said, of a potential ballot issue. That is the emphasis here, because our understanding is that by the end of the month, it needs to be, the clerk needs to be notified as to whether there are any potential ballot issues. The City of Aspen clerk has actually notified the county clerk and recorder that there are potential ballot issues that we will ask them to have on their ballot in November. You have not formalized anything that will be coming up, but the potential is there, and there's a requirement to notify the clerk by the end of the month. and that is the request. But you cannot take a formal action here in this meeting. There's nothing wrong with you as individual council members from asking the county to take some action in that regard and take that step. And if you write a letter individually and you request other council members to join in, as long as you don't do that in an appropriate meeting that you guys all understand, I believe that, then you can
And so
sign
for
that
me to be
letter.
clear, and I appreciate this very much, I had wanted to obviously say this publicly in a public forum, and I will take the letter home, which is on my computer, and clean up one or two small things, and then email it back to each of you as individual people and ask you, would you like me to put your name on the bottom of the letter with me? Then I can do that outside of this meeting.
This is
Separate.
not, it's outside of any formal action
Correct.
by city council, and I do request that you make sure you note in the letter that this is individual council members that are participating with your letter, and it's a simple request to the county commissioners, fellow elected
It says
personnel.
signing as, we are signing as individuals,
Yes.
asking for your
And
consideration.
there's nothing wrong with saying John Doyle, city council member, Tory, mayor, but you're not doing it as an action of council.
So just to be clear, we can make individual requests, but we can put it on a agenda item as a resolution, or what would we do for the
But that would
next?
be kind of after the timeliness of this board.
Yeah, we're putting them on notice individually, but we could formalize it in the form of,
Actually, given a lot of what Rachel has stated, at some point in the future, you might want to take a formal action to specifically request that they put a ballot issue.
Yeah,
If
if they've reserved a spot.
Yeah, this is just reserving, it really is just reserving the spot
Yeah.
at this time.
Okay, well, thank you for everyone for the conversation and consideration, and I will be sending you all an email this evening for you to look back and send something back to me.
And it is very important to do it individually.
Okay, I will, not a group email.
abs are up 1-0.
Thank you.
Ooh, nice. That's a good thing.
All right,
figured
that'll
something was
bring us to
going
the
on
end
in
of
the
our
middle.
work session this evening. We want to thank GrassRoots as always.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful evening. We have no regularly scheduled meeting tomorrow, as council members will be attending a Colorado Municipal League training and meetings over the next few days. So, thank you.